Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to react to some of this fascinating interview with Bill Maher and Neil Degrasse Tyson. A lot of you have been on my case about how I pronounce his name. So yes, thank you for correcting me. Neil Degrasse Tyson. So he was on the Bill Maher show recently and I really enjoyed the interview. I've watched most of it and there were some key parts that really stood out to me. Now Bill Maher, love the guy. However, he does have Trump derangement syndrome. So in regards to Trump, he doesn't seem very logical to me. But in other areas, he's very logical and he doesn't let his politics prevent him from exercising sound judgment. And he calls himself an old school liberal. And there are many old school liberals who can't stand the woke culture of today and who, resist it. Whereas others have basically conformed and have gone down that route. And there were a few times where Bill calls out Neil Degrasse Tyson. He calls him out and says, look, you're a man of science. This isn't acceptable. And I think it was very refreshing to see that. So the first topic that stood out to me is when they discussed COVID and that whole fiasco. Bill makes it very clear that there were a lot of things that were unknown. Yet many doctors and scientists were making assertions when really they should have just been honest and said, yeah, we don't know. We're still gathering all the data. But instead of doing that, they started pushing everybody in one direction. The direction of the mainstream, I guess. The direction of the establishment. And there are people today who regret going along with the whole thing. And we're still suffering the consequences of going along with lockdowns, rolling out, shots that doctors knew nothing about, but yet we're telling people to go and get, telling people that they were safe without giving people true informed consent. And now we're realizing that, some of the things that we told people were wrong. Some of the information out there was actually misinformation. And some of the things that we called misinformation was accurate. And people who didn't follow the doctors who went along with the mainstream were called conspiracy theorists. And Bill Maher makes a good point. This wasn't a matter of some lunatics wanting to rebel against the government. This was a matter of some doctors have different opinions about this whole thing. Opinions that aren't swayed by politics.
So, but people look at the same evidence. I mean, we're really talking about medicine now, even though we're not saying it for some reason. And people look at the same evidence. That's why they say about doctors, get a second opinion. Because in medicine, it is still an opinion. And the experts disagree. Thousands and thousands of doctors and medical experts have disagreed about how we handled COVID. There was just a very big court case called Missouri versus Biden, which decided in the favor of these doctors because they said they weren't allowed to get their point of view across because the government colluded with the tech companies, so we only heard one point of view.
You see how Mr. Degrasse Tyson took a sip of his drink there when Bill mentioned the COVID response and the way we handled it. And yeah, there are people taking legal action now because we had doctors who were slandered, who were smeared, who were thrown off social media. It's one thing to say to me, well, you're not a doctor, but guess what? Actual doctors were given the same treatment. And even worse, they lost their platforms simply because they weren't following politics, simply because they were able to think for themselves and were not going along with the mainstream narrative. Simply because they questioned things and encouraged others to do so. So how can people claim that they were given all the information? We weren't. Our government colluded with social media to suppress information, colluded with tech companies to make sure that we weren't given the full story. I remember posting studies and those studies were fact-checked. And basically, you were made to look like you were spreading misinformation. And nobody saw the studies because you were shadow banned.
So, the science, there's no the in science for things like a new virus that we're still studying and still don't know a lot about. And that's why there is dissenting opinion, lots of it. You don't even hear all of it because they're so intimidated. So something like that.
I'd like to address that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So with the Monday morning quarterback, as we all are, after the facts, we could go back and restructure how the rollout would have and should have been done. There's no question about it, okay? About, the discovery of the virus, the development of the vaccines, the rollout of the vaccines, the progress of the virus, the mutations of the virus, the lethality of the virus, the comorbidities of the virus. All of that could have come out better. And I'd like to think somebody made a book of recommendations from this. So the next time we have another pandemic, which is not, we don't have to wait a century for that we're prepared in a way that people are properly informed. That's my first comment.
Well, we're making that book as we go because lots of stuff we know now that we didn't know, and a lot of it is like, oh yeah, no, that wasn't a good idea, or oh yeah, the virus actually.
Correct. But people were not honest enough about the uncertainties at the time they made their declarations.
And yeah, at least Neil could admit there that there were people making assertions about things they knew nothing about things they were still learning, that they were still uncertain of. Doesn't matter how much of an expert you were, this was a new virus, and this was a new, shot, mRNA technology. And I'm happy to say that Neil said some things that I actually agreed with. He admitted and acknowledged that this is the best time for anybody, who's a person of color, or people who are LGBTQ. Not one person can pick a time in the past that they would choose to go back to and say, we would be treated better in this era.
On a scale of how much that has changed.
Oh, it's an excellent question, Bill, because
it's what I'm always asking.
Bill,
where are we now?
Bill, people don't want to admit how much better things are today.
I'm always making
than
this
at
point.
Any time in the past.
I'm trying to tell the kids this.
I
am always. I'm trying to.
And here's what you do. Here it is. You set up a time machine. Okay, a time machine. Watch, and then if you are female on the gender spectrum or a person of color, and you put them in the time machine and say, pick a time in the past where you were treated better than you are today. And if you really think that through, I don't think there's a single time you can pick.
But the kids
at all.
See, the problem with
well, because that's what they know. But here's the problem.
Well, the problem is education. If you don't teach kids history, if they don't know what happened, they think everything is just the present.
With the present, and everything bad in the present is the worst that ever happened. Right.
I try to tell them I don't even need history books to know something like this. I was alive.
You lived it.
I saw America like you did.
Yes,
but not like you did. That's why I'm asking you, because I can't know what you know.
Here's what I'm telling you. So for me, I'm choosing the future because that arc looks better to me than any time in the past. But the reason why there's value to this exercise is in addition to complaining that things aren't what they should be progressively, if you look at the past and realize how much it has changed, what you can ask is, what did we do right to get to where we are today? Let's do more of that. And rather than only look at what's bad today and then try to eradicate that. There are lessons that we learned. And my father was among them. He was active in the civil rights movement, worked under Mayor Lindsay in New York.
Really?
He was a commissioner, right.
Mayor Lindsay.
I can agree. Obviously, in the past, we knew what a man was. We knew what a woman was. Obviously, in the past, we gravitated more towards family values, traditional family values. So don't get me wrong, there's some things that I wish we had maintained from the past, from old school values that we've lost today. But this focus on acting as if we're living in a civil rights era where Black people don't have rights and we're not equal and all of this is ridiculous. And our young people are out there desperate to fight for a cause, and they're picking any old thing to fight for, when really they should be grateful for where they are today, for what people did fight for them to enjoy. But they don't seem to be grateful about it. They just want to insist on acting as if they're oppressed and they're not actually privileged. Anybody who lives in America in some form or another is privileged. People don't want to hear that. If you're in America, you have opportunities that people in other parts of the world can only dream of. So therefore, you are privileged to be in a country that affords you certain rights that are absent in other countries. And now for the juicy part. Bill is going to call out Neil in a spectacular way. He's going to call him out but not using his influence on young people in a positive way at times. Instead, he uses his influence to push agendas, to push ideologies, to push ideas that aren't very scientific.
You've abandoned college campuses in your stand-up.
Every comedian has.
Okay, so
Literally everyone.
let me ask you. If you came up today, would you just read the landscape and develop a whole other comedic repertoire that does not end up having people picket outside your thing? Are you just transposed and you're not adjusting to the shifting terrain? So why is it their fault and not your fault?
Well, you're being so broad about the whole thing.
Yeah, I am.
Well, but that doesn't work because that doesn't ever explain anything. If you want to talk about specific issues, it's funny, this subject comes up a lot of times with like people who are, my friends who are around my age, 40. No, and they have like kids who are like super woke and drive them fucking nuts.
I got woke kids. I will never be as woke as my kids would want me to be, ever.
Yeah, but you're a little too, still. And, woke does not automatically mean better. Newer does not automatically mean
that's
better.
true.
So that's why I say to talk broadly is bullshit. You have to like talk about what specific, issue are we talking about? The ones that get people's attention are gender issues.
Yeah, I know, but what?
Things like that. This is
Bill,
very different.
You cut your teeth in the 70s.
What I'm saying is,
and you read the room.
Okay, but I'll answer
you read the politics.
I didn't read the politics.
Yes, you did.
How the fuck do you know what I did?
Because I know your jokes of the era. They were great.
Well, a lot of people think they're great now.
Okay, they're still great.
I don't know if you don't any.
No. What I meant was,
am I not woke enough for you?
Were jokes that would work on a college campus.
Is it any surprise that comedians have abandoned college campuses with a bunch of snowflakes who can't handle comedy anymore? With students who have been indoctrinated, with students who have been taught to be miserable and to not laugh at anything anymore because everything is offensive to them. Everything is bigotry. Everything is racist, who look for things to be offended at. So there's no way they can handle comedy, especially old school comedy. So of course, comedians don't want to go to college campuses anymore. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is suggesting that Bill changes his comedy to fit in line with today's generation, who think that men and women are the same, who think it's offensive to say that women are women and men are men. Like Bill said, to be more specific, when you talk about gender, they can't handle it. Rather than changing my comedy to fit woke ideology, I'm going to go where I'm wanted. It's very simple. If I'm not wanted there, I'm not going to go.
Okay. Surely there's a portfolio of jokes that would still work on a college campus. Surely.
I would hope not. From what maybe some college campuses, the ones you read about are fucking insane.
You've given up on an entire generation, and you don't know how to make them laugh.
I have given up on any place that doesn't even remotely attempt to believe in free speech and thinks that anything that they hear that they don't like, that they don't agree with, is violence. These people are nuts, and you should be calling them out. Somebody like you, who has standing with kids, should be not joining them.
When there's a science objectivity to it.
You're doing what parents do. You're taking the path of least resistance, and therefore hurting the kids and yourself. Parents ruin both their lives. They ruin their spoiled kids' lives, and they ruin their own lives because the kids rule the roost. So that's what you're doing on a national level.
I'm feeling more like on the porch. Get off my lawn.
Really? I feel like we're in the barbershop.
Well, that works too.
Definitely reminds me of the barbershop guys in Coming to America. That's what it reminds me of. But very well said. As somebody who says that he enjoys Bill's comedy, tell that to the students. There is no comedy if they bow to this sort of thing. Because what are they going to be able to joke about? Everything is going to be offensive.
So here's my point.
That's my
I'm
piece.
trying to get through to people on my social media and the like, and I see what pisses people off, what they react to, and I say, all right, these are the landmines. I'm going to navigate that. I'm going to navigate.
Okay, you're.
So I navigate it so that I can say, because my father's greatest bit of wisdom to me, several nuggets, one of them was, it's not good enough to be right. You also have to be effective. And if you reject the college campus, then you have no influence on them. They're not going to say, oh, we're not going to get Bill, maybe we should change. Then you have no influence on them.
Sweetheart, I can wait till they grow up a little. Okay, I can wait. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about with comedians.
You pull age rank on me?
Comedian. No, you don't know what I'm talking about. You know you know outer space.
Well, what I will tell you.
I know doing comedy shows.
I'm a huge consumer of your trade.
Thank you.
He called him sweetheart. The fact is, go where you're wanted. That's it. Go where you know people are going to appreciate your artistry. If not, then let them stew in their own misery. So I don't think Bill should have to adapt, or any other comedian should have to adapt as to not cause offence. Comedians certainly don't tiptoe around people, do they? A college campus is where you learn to speak to people who you disagree with amicably. But today, we have people being run off campus, literally. We have people having their freedom of speech suppressed because students are shouting, wailing, not letting people be heard, getting people locked into cupboards, locked into rooms for 3 hours and, holding them to ransom. I admire people who put themselves out there and go to places with people who have dissenting opinions. I admire people who do that. But when it's entertainment, I'm sorry, no. You don't have to put yourself through that. For what? And here we get to the best part where Bill calls out Neil on all of this gender nonsense that he's been spewing recently, where he basically claimed that there's no difference between men and women. And he has this emphasis on hormones, which drives me nuts because it's as if he thinks that the only difference between men and women are hormones. So if you predominantly produce testosterone, you're a man. If you predominantly produce estrogen, you're a woman. As if that's all there is. Nothing to do with the anatomy of a man, the anatomy of a woman, the parts that are exclusive to men and women. Nothing to do with that. One can have babies, one cannot. Again, he doesn't address any of that. He just talks about hormones.
I know you think that, you had a thing with Martina Navratilova.
What do you mean I have nothing? What do you mean?
A beef. She has beef with you.
Why does she have a beef with me?
Because you think guys with dicks should get in the women's swimming pool, basically.
Well, whatever got clipped and reposted, I don't know. But what I said was that in this emergent space where you have people expressing themselves on a gender spectrum, and you want to now compete in sports, that's still a frontier to be solved. And I don't have the answer, but I can suggest one, whether or not it'll work. Maybe we don't compete by gender anymore. We compete on hormone ratios, okay? There was a woman who had uncommonly high testosterone levels, and they wanted to disqualify her because of how manly she was when she was born a woman and competing as a woman. So that's how we're going to do it.
This
is what you really want. Wait, Bill, no, I've thought this through more than you might think I have.
Oh.
So what you really want is an interesting contest between people who are similarly talented. The least interesting Super Bowl you could ever watch is a blowout by halftime.
See, what we agree on is that there are anomalies in human nature, whereas
yes. Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of people, I'm sorry, are still male or female. And certainly every cell in our body is dictating one of those other sexes. I mean, obviously...
Well, the hormones are. Yeah.
Obviously also I make sperm and other people make eggs.
That's what hormones do. Yeah.
You can't deny that. Okay.
Did you catch that? That's what hormones do. If a man starts taking a bunch of estrogen, is he able to have babies? Based on what he's saying, he truly seems to believe that the only difference between men and women are hormones. So if we inject a biological male with estrogen, he's going to be a woman. And he's talking about exceptions as if that should dictate how we conduct our sports, as if that should dictate how we categorize people. Some women may have a higher level of testosterone than the average woman, yes, as in the example he gave there. But that doesn't mean that we should now conduct our sports around the exceptions because we want to accommodate people who are taking synthetic hormones. I mean, does that mean in order to be able to compete on a competitive level, we all have to inject ourselves with hormones then? If I want to compete on a competitive level, I need to start taking testosterone. Let's just allow people to dope. It's ridiculous. He knows what he's saying is nonsense because he's a man of science. But I don't know what he's trying to do there, being intellectually dishonest, saying that it's the hormones. What about human anatomy?
So but we, as liberals, we, I think, agree that, there are anomalies in nature and they should be respected and protected. But this attempt to reorganize all of society around what a very tiny percentage, who, again, we can protect and respect without pretending that every baby is a jump ball, like penis. What the fuck? I don't know. That doesn't mean anything. We have no idea what this child is. I mean, that seems to be where you want to go. I mean, like, how many people fit this description that we should reorganize sports around? Sports we have men's sports and women's sports. And if the best team in the WNBA played the worst team in the NBA, the score would be 1,000,000-0.
I mean, we even had someone challenge the WNBA women to compete against high school boys in basketball. And the WNBA was smart and didn't respond. I don't blame them. They didn't respond. I mean, look at the high school boys' 100 meters record. It is faster than the women's 100 meters record. So again, that's not to disparage female athletes, but it's to say there are distinct differences between men and women. Men are typically faster than women. Men are typically stronger than women physically. So that's just the reality. That's why there are categories, to ensure that sports is fair. Now, Neil actually alluded to people not wanting to watch sports where a certain group just dominate and it's over before you know it. And that's true. So if you allow males into sports against women, that's what we're going to see. We're going to be seeing the men who identify as women dominating and taking over. And nobody's going to be able to go and see women's sports quite the same way ever again. People aren't going to watch that. People aren't going to be interested. I'm convinced, and nobody is going to be interested in that. And he's basically admitted that. The rest of the world, or at least non-Western countries, are not going to be on board with this. They're going to still be having male categories and female categories. So what happens when we do international sporting events? It's ridiculous. He's still trying to make this sound scientific. He's still doubling down on this insanity. For a man of science, he is committed to pushing the ideology. That's all this is.
Can we organize society around that basic point with this, of course, proviso that we protect and respect people who do not fit into it?
Let's segregate society between
That's
dark-skinned
not
people and light-skinned
segregating.
people
It's
because
not-
that nature made it that way, and that's how it is. So,
Well, nature did make it that way.
You are,
And it's not segregating.
well, there
It's
was a
not
time
segregating anything.
that attitude 150 years ago was
2 years ago. You act like this was yes, right. Lincoln. This was a big issue in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Trans people. That's
No,
right.
I'm talking about
I
black,
remember
white.
that from
I'm talking about black,
1861. Yes, I remember those debates.
It was 1860,
and
I think,
Lincoln
but yeah.
was all about getting trans. Oh, for sake. You're ridiculous.
no.
So this is something you need to be aware of. These radical leftists are going to start saying that you believe in segregation. The same thing happened when Candace Owens went to that college campus and she was debating about Leah Thomas. The woman walked off saying, well, you believe in segregation. They're now equating this to segregation between, in the civil rights era with blacks and whites. Can't go to the same school, can't use the same water fountain, can't sit in the same place on the bus. That's what they're equating this to. So basically, anybody who believes in categories in sports is a bigot. Some people fall for this. I want to compete only with other women. Doesn't matter what skin color they are. Doesn't matter what background they come from. Doesn't matter what, nationality they are. I just ask that they're women within my weight category, if that's, relevant. And that's it. That is not segregation. In fact, segregation did occur in sports, and it's actually making a mockery out of that to suggest that separating men and women is the same thing. It actually makes a mockery out of real racism, out of real, the real era of segregation. And I even heard on a podcast somebody say, liken what happened to Leah Thomas to Black women being segregated in sports. Someone actually had the nerve to try and compare those things.
It makes me think about how we've also seen other women policed in a similar way, which I think, you and I've talked a lot about, something I've talked a lot about online, which is that this isn't new, right? Like you being policed this way or you being ridiculed this way is perhaps new for you, but it's not new for like women's sports, right?
No.
We've seen this happen repeatedly for especially Black and brown women, any woman that deviates from this like image of womanhood. And I think, I don't know, for me, it's always so important to have people remember that.
Yeah, it's very important for everybody to remember that this policing of trans women and this transphobia is not sort of isolated on its own. It's part of this broader system of trying to police people's bodies and especially women's bodies. And that comes down on mostly marginalized groups, trans women, Black and brown women.
Yes, this is a real thing. They liken it to segregation, and it's intellectually dishonest, historically dishonest, and just insulting. Absolutely insulting to people who lived through that time, or who have relatives who lived through that time, or appreciate where we are today and we're no longer in those days. It's not the same. But just be aware, you may come across people using that argument, so be prepared for that. Just when you think it can't get any worse. So, great podcast episode. I actually enjoyed, both of them made good points, but I'm glad Bill ended up calling out Neil deGrasse Tyson from one liberal to another. Because it's one thing being called out by people who he perceives as conservatives or leaning right. But when you're called out by one of your own, you've got no excuse. You can't say it's bigotry. You can't say it's racism. Hopefully it gets him to really think about what he's saying next time, but I doubt it. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.